Nowhere.
Hallelujah. 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 Praise the mighty Yah. Yah is righteous. Yah is holy. And let Yahweh be magnified. Welcome to another beautiful broadcast of Nothing But the Truth. I am Mowreh IshYAH from the House of Israel of Cincinnati, located at 1907 Vine Street, here to bring you nothing but the truth of the mighty Yah. And who is this Yah? Yahweh is the creator of the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that therein is. Yahweh is the only judge, the only lawgiver, the only redeemer, and the only savior of Yisrael in the world. Yah is the Elohim of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Yahweh is the one that raised us up to bring you the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And that's what we will do. Teach Yah's truth. And shalom to all of our listeners and viewers in our internet audience, for we know that the only reason that you are listening to our program today is because of your great fear and your great love toward the mighty Yah. And what will we be discussing today? Today we will be discussing what Yahweh will do in that day. And we make reference to in that day because the Almighty made reference to in that day. What does in that day even mean? To know what in that day means, you would have to know what day itself is. Because many of our people think a day is a night, think a day is signaled or signified or heralded by a moon. They think a day is when the stars are out. They think a day is according to the heathens that have enslaved them. But Yahweh wants you to know when he says in that day, he's talking about a particular time, and you have to be ready against that time. For instance, in the book of Genesis, the first chapter, the very first verse, the Creator said, in the beginning, Elohim created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of Elohim moved upon the face of the waters. And Elohim said, let there be light. And there was light. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good. And Elohim divided the light from the darkness. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So in that day, Yahweh made day. In the very first day, Yahweh made and gave us the foundation to what a day is. And as we have just read, a day had nothing to do with a night. As a matter of fact, a day had everything to do and is solely defined by light. And therefore, what is a day? A day is light. So when Yahweh says in that day, he's talking about a certain light period. A period in when there is light in that day. For instance, go to the book of Genesis, the 3rd chapter. Verse 1 reads, Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which Yahweh Elohim had made. And he said unto the woman, hath Elohim said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, Elohim said, you shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, you shall not surely die, for Elohim doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil. And what is the serpent saying? At the time that you eat this, your eyes will be opened. But what did Yahweh say in Genesis, the 2nd chapter? In Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, it says, and Yahweh Elohim took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. And Yahweh commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it. For in the day that you eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. In the day. Does that mean in the day that the sun rises and sets, or in the time that he eats it? Is there a time that he would give him? But the serpent said, in the day that you eat it, your eyes will be open. And so in chapter 3 again, we'll see what went down. In verse 6 it says, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them were both opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. And they heard the voice of Yahweh Elohim walking in the garden. In the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Yahweh Elohim amongst the trees of the garden. And Yahweh Elohim called unto Adam and said unto him, where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. And he said, who told you that you were naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree, whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat? And the man said, the woman who you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. And Yahweh said unto the woman, what is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, the serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. And then Yahweh ended up letting Adam know that because you ate this, you shall return to the dust. And before he ate it, he said, don't eat it, because if you do, you'll die in that day. Which let us know that Yahweh was talking about a time. But this time was denoted by the light. And let's see. Go to Genesis, the 5th chapter. And in Genesis chapter 5, verse 4, it says, in the days of Adam, after he had begotten Seth, were 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters. In all the days, not all the moons, not all the nights, but all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. That means what? That those days, those years were denoted by days. But Yah said, in that day, singular, ye shall die. But he lived 930 years. Well, let's look at someone else. In the same chapter 5 and verse 25, it says, and Methuselah lived 187 years and begot Lamech. And Methuselah lived after he begot Lamech 782 years and begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years. And he died. Well, he almost lived to 1,000. But he didn't. But all the days, not moons, not nights, but days of his years. Well, why is it that they didn't die in that day? He did say, in the day that you eat it, you shall surely die. Well, go to Psalms 90, and it might give you an understanding of why Yahweh said it this way. In Psalms 90, it says in the first verse, Yahweh, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever thou hadst formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting. Thou art Elohim. Thou turnest man to destruction and sayest, return, ye children of men. For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night. What did Moses just let us know? That 1,000 years is one day to the Almighty. That's it. And did he not tell Adam, in the day that you eat this fruit, you'll die? And Adam died before 1,000 years were complete. And Methuselah, 969, died before 1,000 years were complete. Which means what? Yahweh sees a day as 1,000 years. One whole day to Yah, he just look at it 1,000 years, that's just a day. But to man, 1,000 years is a really long time. But Yahweh is so awesome, his perspective is, man, that's just a day. And this is how he spoke to Adam and let him know. But then there were other times where Yahweh was specifically talking about in that day. If you go to the book of the 8th chapter of Exodus. See, before you know what Yahweh is saying about in that day, you got to understand how the Most High looks at it. Even though 1,000 years is a day to Yah, it's still about days of the years, and not moons, and not nights, and not stars, but days. And in Exodus, the 8th chapter, the 20th verse, Yahweh says, and Yahweh said unto Moses, rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh. Lo, he cometh forth to the water. And say unto him, thus saith Yahweh, let my people go, that they may serve me. Else if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy houses, and in the houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground whereon they are. And I will sever in that day the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, to the end that thou mayest know that I am Yahweh, in the midst of the earth. And I will put a division between my people and thy people. Tomorrow shall this sign be. And Yahweh did so. And there came a grievous swarm of flies into the house of Pharaoh, and into his servants' houses, and into all the land of Egypt, and the land was corrupted by the reason of the swarms of flies. And Pharaoh called for Moses and for Aaron, and said, Go ye, sacrifice to your Elohim in the land. And Moses said, It is not meet so to do, for we shall sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians to Yahweh our Elohim. Lo, shall we sacrifice the abominations of the Egyptians before their eyes? And will they not stone us? We will go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to Yahweh our Elohim as he shall command us. And Pharaoh said, I will let you go, that ye may sacrifice to Yah your Elohim in the wilderness. Only ye shall not go very far away. Entreat for me. And Moses said, Behold, I go out from thee, and I will entreat Yahweh, that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, and from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. But let not Pharaoh deal deceitfully any more in not letting the people go to sacrifice unto Yah. And this in that day, when Yah said in that day, it happened the day he said it would happen. He said tomorrow there will be swarms of flies. And in that day, he severed Israel. So in that day, Israel was able to see that they were separated from the horrors of Egypt, because Yahweh said it would happen in that day, in that time. He told you what time it would happen. He didn't say in that night. He didn't say in that moon. He didn't tell you to look for the moon to let you know what's going to happen. Look for the stars, to look for the constellation. He said in that day, when you see the swarms of flies, you'll also see Israel is separated from these flies in that day. Just like he said, in that day, you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you'll die. And that's what happened in that day. Even look at the book of Exodus, the 12th chapter, the 40th verse. Where it reads, Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass that all the host of Yahweh went out from the land of Egypt. That selfsame day. But then he said in the next verse, it is a night to be much observed unto Yahweh for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of Yahweh to be observed for all the children of Israel in their generations. I thought he said in the self-same day. He surely did. Because what is this self-same day? This day is the time at the end of the 430 years, meaning the 430th year had completed itself in that exact time, because a year is measured by days, and that self-same day they came out, and at night is when they came out. That's when they came out. It was nighttime when they came out, and it happened in that same day of the end of the 430 years, because a year is measured by days, not nights. It just so happened that it was night when we came out. So even in that day, the end of the 430 years, we came out at that self-same day. at that same time. Meaning another day didn't come by to make it 431 years. Because if we would have been there one day longer, it couldn't have been 430 years. It had to be a whole nother year that we would have went into. So in that day, look in Exodus the 13th chapter, in the 6th verse. And we're talking about in that day and what Yahweh does in that day. But if you want to know about that day, you got to know what a day is, how Yahweh looks at days. And in Exodus 13, verse 6, it says, 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and in the 7th day shall be a feast unto Yahweh. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and there shall be no leavened bread seen with thee, neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all thy quarters. And thou shalt show thy son in that day, saying, this is done because of that which Yahweh did unto me when I came forth out of Egypt. And it shall be a sign unto thee upon thine hand, and for a memorial between thine eyes, that Yahweh's law may be in thy mouth. For with a strong hand hath Yahweh brought thee out of Egypt. And so in that day that you're eating unleavened bread, in that exact day, you got to tell your son, we're doing this because Yahweh brought us out at this time. He wants you to remember this happened at this time. Look in Deuteronomy, the 16th chapter. The first verse. It says, observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover unto Yahweh thy Elohim. For in the month of Abib, Yahweh thy Elohim brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Thou shalt therefore sacrifice the Passover unto Yahweh thy Elohim of the flock and of the herd in the place which Yahweh shall choose. The place is named there. So you got to understand, in that month, we came out of Egypt. And when did we come out? We actually left Egypt specifically and precisely stepped foot outside of Egypt. It was nighttime. But it was the day that it happened. Because Yahweh measures months by days, years by days. And even in that day, will you tell your son why you're eating unleavened bread? Because of what Yah did in that day. And Yahweh is very specific. If he wants you to do it in that day, he'll tell you to do it in that day. If he said he's going to do something in that day, then that's when it's going to happen. Look at what he told Samuel in 1 Samuel, the 3rd chapter. In verse 11, he says, and Yahweh said unto Samuel, behold, I will do a thing in Israel, at which both the ears of everyone that heareth it shall tingle. In that day, what day? The day that he does this thing, when everybody hears of it, their ears will tingle. In that day, I will perform against Eli all the things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. And therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever. And so what happened then? Let's see if Yahweh told the truth or if he told a lie. In the 4th chapter, in verse 11, it says, "And the ark of Elohim was taken, and the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were slain. And there ran a man of Benjamin out of the army, and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes rent, and with earth upon his head. And when he came, lo, Eli sat upon a seat by the wayside, watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of the Elohim, for the ark of Elohim. And when the man came into the city and told it, all the city cried out. And when Eli heard the noise of the crying, he said, What meaneth the noise of this tumult? And the man came hastily and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were dim, that he could not see. And the man said unto Eli, I am he that came out of the army, and I fled today out of the army. And he said, What is there done now, my son? And the messenger answered and said, Israel is fled before the Philistines, and there hath been also a great slaughter among the people, and thy 2 sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of Elohim is taken. And it came to pass, when he made mention of the ark of Elohim, that he fell from his seat, from off the seat backward, in the side of the gate, and his neck broke, and he died, for he was an old man and heavy, and he had judged Israel 40 years. Did not Yah say there would be a tingling among everybody's ears? That this would be a thing done in Israel? That in the same day he will kill his sons, and he will take away, what did he say? He said they will have no one left in his family to do sacrifice. And that's exactly what Yah did in the same day, in that day. And that's what he did. And also, how did Yahweh, or what did Yahweh say about Israel, about our times? See, now, when you see that in that day, Yahweh is specific, but there are certain signs that you'll look for to know that this is that time. This is what he spoke of in that day. You can't look at the moon to find it. You can't look at the stars to find it. You know it's going to be in that day. For instance, look in the book of, I believe it's Amos. Yeah, Amos, the 8th chapter. People want to see blood moons and what's those things called? Eclipses. But look what Yahweh said in the book of Amos, the 8th chapter. And in Amos chapter 8, we'll begin reading at the 7th verse, where it says, Yahweh has sworn by the excellency of Yaakov, surely I will never forget any of their works. Shall not the land tremble for this, and every one mourn that dwelleth therein? And it shall rise up wholly as a flood, and it shall be cast out and drowned as by the flood of Egypt. And it shall come to pass in that day, saith Yahweh Elohim, that I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and will darken the earth in a clear day. This is a clear sign. When Yahweh says he's about to take care of his people, deal and judge his people that have done wickedly, he says that this time it's going to be a clear day, but I'm going to make the sun go down in noon, when the sun is at its highest point, so everybody see it. And it's going to be clear, so you're not going to mistake. Clouds covered it. It's the sun. It went down on a clear day. Because the day of Yah is darkness. He didn't tell you you got to look for a red moon, an orange-tinted reddish moon. No. Look what Yah said in the book of Joel, the 2nd chapter. In the book of Joel, the 2nd chapter, he says in the 30th verse, "And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke." Have you seen blood and fire and pillars of smoke in the heavens? "The sun shall be turned into darkness," meaning the moon ain't covering up, because he said, "in the moon into blood," actual blood, not an orange tinted, shady, hazy, reddish moon, but blood, meaning it's going to be blood in the heavens. Blood is going to be the moon before the great and terrible day of Yahweh come. "And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of Yahweh shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance. And Yahweh has, as Yahweh have said, and in the remnant whom Yahweh have called." Yeah, when Yahweh, the day of Yah, when the sun is dark and there's blood and fire and pillars of smoke in the sky and the moon is blood, that's when you need to call on Yahweh. Because that's the day of Yah. They keep on saying, "Oh, the day of Yah is coming, the day of Yah is here." And it's a blood moon, and it's not even a blood moon. You know what blood look like. He's not mistaking you for anything else. Look in the book of Deuteronomy, the 31st chapter. See, there's signs that go with that day. There's things that will be happening in that day that will allow you to know that this is that day that Yah spoke of. In Deuteronomy chapter 31, we'll start reading at verse 12. It says, "Gather the people together, men and women and children, and thy stranger that is within thy gates, and that they may learn and fear Yahweh your Elohim, and observe to do all the words of this law, and that their children which have not known anything may hear and learn to fear Yahweh your Elohim, as long as ye live in the land whither you go over Jordan to possess it." And Yahweh said unto Moses, "Behold, thy days approach that thou must die. Call Joshua and present yourselves in the tabernacle of the congregation, that I may give him a charge." And Moses called Joshua. Moses and Joshua went in and presented themselves in the tabernacle of the congregation. And Yahweh appeared in the tabernacle in a pillar of a cloud, and a pillar of the cloud stood over the door of the tabernacle. And Yahweh said unto Moses, "Behold, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, and this people will rise up and go a whoring after other deities of the strangers of the land, whither they go to be among them, and will forsake me and break my covenant which I have made with them. Then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day." What day? That they go a whoring after other deities. When they broke Yah's covenant, Yahweh said his anger will be kindled in that day, meaning in that time. "And I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, are not these evils come upon us, because our Elohim is not among us? And I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evils which they shall have wrought, in that they are turned unto other gods. Well, you wonder why all this evil is going on at this time? Is because of exactly what Yahweh said would happen in that day. In the day that our parents, in the day that our forefathers, in the day that our ancestors turned away from Yah and served other deities, Yahweh became angry. And Yahweh allowed the evil to befall us. And in this day of trouble and horror, Yahweh's waiting for you to consider him. Because he said you would in that day. But when will you? Because it is that time. You can even look in the book of Deuteronomy, the 4th chapter. All Yahweh is doing is waiting for you to consider that day that you're in. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 26, he said, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that ye shall soon utterly perish from off the land wherever you go to Jordan to possess it. Ye shall not prolong your days upon it, but shall utterly be destroyed. And Yahweh shall scatter you among the nations, and you shall be left few in number among the heathen, whither Yahweh shall lead you. And there you shall serve other deities, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. But if from thence thou shalt seek Yahweh your Elohim, thou shalt find him, if thou shalt seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. When thou art in tribulation, and all these things are come upon you, even in the latter days, if thou turn to Yahweh your Elohim, and shalt be obedient to his voice. For Yahweh thy Elohim is a merciful Elohim. See, in them latter days, you just got to consider Yahweh in your trouble. Look in the book of Ecclesiastes. Because there's a lot of trouble going on, and our people are still trying to figure out how to get the bag. That's not the day. You ain't trying to get the bag, the money bag, or whatever other bag you're trying to get. You need to be thinking about getting the word of Yah. If that bag got the scriptures in it, then get that bag. But that other bag, what you going to do with that in that day? In Ecclesiastes, the 7th chapter. We're going to start reading in the 4th verse. No, let's start in the 1st verse. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. Yeah, if you go into the house of mourning to a funeral, to where somebody has died, and you're going to look and think about your own mortality, you're going to consider you're not going to be here forever. You too are going to lay there one day, dead and lifeless, and people are going to sit around mourning you, crying about you, and what are they going to be talking about? How much money you owed them? How scandalous you were? How you never took care of your children? How you partied in the club all your life? How you smoked crack to the day you died? Or are they going to consider that you considered that you watched your steps, that you served the Most High. Verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance of the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For as a crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This is also vanity. So he's letting you know you got to consider in this trouble that we're in, that Yahweh would say he would do in this day. It's the time to consider him. For instance, go to the book of Isaiah, the 3rd chapter. First verse. And it reads, for behold, the Master, Yahweh of hosts, doth take away from Jerusalem and from Yehudah the stay and the staff, the whole stay of bread and the whole stay of water, the mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, and the prudent and the ancient, which means there's no decent men around. And the captain of 50, no men of war, no captains, no mighty men, no judges, no prophets, no prudent, no ancients, and the honorable man, and the counselor, and the cunning artificer, and the eloquent orator, and I will give children to be their princes. Well, why not? Because there's no decent, mature, upstanding, good citizen men around. And I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. And the people shall be oppressed, every one by another. Of course, there's nobody to set the record straight. And every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient. You notice these things going on? And the base against the honorable. I see them all the time. When a man shall take hold of his brother, of the house of his father, saying, thou hast clothing, you must be honorable. Be thou our ruler. You got clothes. You got nice clothes. You should be our ruler. And let this ruin be under thy hand. Why don't you take care of all this, man? You got clothes. You must got money. You must have some substance. How about you take care of all this crazy stuff? In that day shall he swear, saying, I will not be a healer. I'm not about to take care of y'all. For in my house is neither bread nor clothing. I don't got enough. Make me not rule other people. I can't do this. And that's what men are saying. Nah, it ain't enough. I don't got no clothes. I don't have enough. Even though children running rampant, oppression running rampant, Yahweh is saying that in that day, a man will not want to take on this responsibility. In that day. These are the things that's going on today. Look in the book of Isaiah, the 2nd chapter. These are the signs you need to look for to see if he's talking about this day. Or has that already happened? In Isaiah 2, start reading at verse 12. For the day of Yahweh of hosts shall be upon everyone that is proud and lofty. You hear what he said? For the day of Yahweh of hosts shall be upon everyone that is proud and lofty, and upon everyone that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. Why you think Yahweh speaks to his servants and says, stay humble? He don't want the destruction that he's bringing upon the proud and the lofty and those that are lifted up to be on the humble. He said he dwells with the humble. So if you're proud and you're lofty and you're lifted up, the day of Yah is upon you. And everyone shall be brought low. And upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan, even the trees that are high, and upon all the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, even the mountains that are high, and the hills that are high, and upon every high tower, even the Empire State Building, Sears Tower. I don't know what they call it today. Years ago, that tallest tower in America, and at one time the world was called Sears Tower in Chicago. Now you got the World Trade Center in New York City. It's the tallest building in the country. Even that tower will be brought low. The tower, highest towers in North Korea and Dubai and Japan and Europe, all these towers, the Eiffel Tower, all these towers, and upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall. So I don't know why Trump running to build this wall, even the high wall, and upon all the ships, a Tarshish, all your ships, all the big and high cruise ships, and all the pleasant pictures that you sell for $1 billion, your Mona Lisas, your Picassos and Rembrandts, whatever that artist's name is, and everything you taking pride in, and the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low, and Yahweh alone shall be exalted in that day. Yes, that's how you know it's that day. You see all these high towers, these high hills, these artists with their nose up high, talking about, yes, my painting is $1 billion. The Mona Lisas, the Picassos, the Eiffel Towers, the World Trade Centers, the towering idols that you build, all the high and lofty things that you take pride in, even the trees and even the mountains, Yahweh will bring them down, and he will be the only one exalted in that day. And the idols shall utterly abolish, and they shall go into the holes of the rocks and into the holes of the caves of the earth, for the fear of Yahweh and for the glory of his majesty, when he arises to shake terribly the earth. In that day a man shall cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made each one for himself, to worship. To the moles and to the bats, they're going to look at that JC piece on their neck and just rip it off and just throw it away. They're going to look at all that silver and gold that they bound down and just throw it away, because Yahweh would have brought it low in that day. Have you seen this happen yet? If you ain't seen this happen yet, that's because it's not that day. Because Yahweh lets you know what's going to happen in these days. You can't mistake these days for something else just because you don't want to live in that day. You don't want to see that day. Well, it's going to happen. Go to Isaiah, the 4th chapter. As a matter of fact, Isaiah the 3rd chapter, verse 16. And it reads, Moreover, Yahweh saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with stretched forth necks, and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making a tinkling with their feet. What is he talking about? Haughty people, prideful people. They always got to be known. That's why they loud, walking with the clicking and the mincing and the tinkling and the noise. Because they're proud. They want attention. They want you to see them. They want you to hear them. Therefore Yahweh will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion. And Yahweh will discover their secret parts. In that day, what day? The day of their pride. Yahweh will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments about their feet, and their calls, and their round tires like the moon, the chains and the bracelets, the mufflers, the bonnets and the ornaments of the legs, and the headbands, and the tablets, and the earrings, the rings, and the nose jewels, the changeable suits of apparel, and the mantles, and the wimples, and the crisping pins, the glasses, and the fine linen, and the hoods, and the veils. All that stuff that y'all wearing today. In that day of your pride, when Yahweh says it's time to bring it low, he's going to take that away. Some will say this already happened. When we was brought buck naked on slave ships. Oh, yeah. But I still see women doing all of these things. And Yahweh said in 24th verse, and it shall come to pass that instead of a sweet smell, there shall be stink. And instead of the girdle, a rent. And instead of well-set hair, baldness. And instead of a stomacher, a girding of sackcloth, and burning instead of beauty. Thy men shall fall by the sword, and thy mighty in the war. And her gates shall lament and mourn, and she being desolate shall sit upon the ground. In chapter 4, verse 1, and in that day, what day? The day that the men fall by the sword, the day that you've been brought low. Not the day that you ain't been brought low. Not the day that your men hasn't fallen in the war. But the day you've been brought low. In that day, 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, we will eat our own bread, and we will wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name to take away our reproach. In that day, humility is going to come before honor. In verse 2, it says, in that day. What day? The day that 7 women take hold of one man. The day that there's not a lot of men because of the war. The day where you've been brought low. In that day shall the branch of Yahweh be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely for them that are escaped of Israel. And it shall come to pass that he that is left in Zion and he that remaineth in Jerusalem shall be called holy. While people don't want this to happen, people said this already happened. 7 women already took hold of one man. We don't got to worry about that no more. That's not going to happen anymore. No, Yahweh said this is the day where the remnant is left, where Israel has escaped, where you're left in Zion as a remnant, and you're going to be called beautiful and excellent and holy. While people want to make jokes about this and comment and say that, no, this already happened and whatever they're saying, Yahweh said this is going to be a time of beauty and holiness. Excellent. And you'll be called holy, everyone that is written among the living in Jerusalem. When Yahweh shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion, and shall have purged the blood of Jerusalem from the midst thereof by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning. So you see, the Creator got specific signs of things that you need to look for in that day. Right now, all the towers is still standing. The trees, the mountains, the haughtiness of the people. The Mona Lisa is still a famous painting. Picasso and Rembrandt are still held on high. The Eiffel Tower is still standing. The haughtiness of men is still high. The daughters of Zion are still haughty. The men haven't died in the war. I don't see 7 women taking hold of no man saying we will buy our own food and our own clothes. Just let us be called by thy name. These things haven't happened. It's not that day, but it is approaching. It is coming soon. It will be that day. And will you be one of the ones that Yahweh said, the day of Yah is upon all the haughty and prideful, and all the ones that are lifted up to be brought low? Or will you already be low? Miss the slaughter. Save yourself and humble yourself, because that day is coming. Look in the book of Isaiah, the 10th chapter. We'll start reading in verse 10. It says, as my hand hath found the kingdoms of the idols, and whose graven images did excel them of Jerusalem and of Samaria, shall I not, as I have done unto Samaria and her idols, so do to Jerusalem and her idols? Wherefore it shall come to pass that when Yahweh hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, that I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria, and the glory of his high looks. For he saith, by the strength of my hand I have done it, and by my wisdom, for I am prudent, and I have removed the bounds of the people, and have robbed their treasures, and I have put down the inhabitants like a valiant man. In my hand have found as a nest the riches of the people, and as one gathereth eggs that are left, have I gathered all the earth, and there was none that moved the wing, or opened the mouth, or peeped. Shall the axe boast himself against him that heweth therewith? Or shall the saw magnify himself against him that shaketh it? Yahweh saying the king of Assyria is talking pretty boldly, pretty haughtily, as if the rod should shake itself against them that lift it up, or as if the staff should lift himself up itself, as if it were no wood. Therefore shall Yahweh of hosts, send among his fat ones leanness, and under his glory he shall kindle a burning like the burning of a fire. And the light of Israel shall be for a fire, and his Holy One for a flame. And it shall burn and devour his thorns and his briars in one day, and shall consume the glory of his forest and the fruitful field, both soul and body. And they shall be as when the standard bearer fainteth, and the rest of the trees of his forest shall be few, that a child may write them. This is what Yahweh said he's going to do to the king of Assyria and the nations that boast against him. And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel, such as are escaped of the house of Jacob, shall no more again stay upon him that smote them, but shall stay upon Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel in truth. The remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty Elohim. For though thy people Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant of them shall return. The consumption decreed shall overflow with righteousness. Yahweh's let you know after he has shamed the Assyrian, that they rule no more, that their kingdom is finished, that their rulership is gone. You're no longer going to stay upon them. And the children of Israel are still in captivity, still exiled from their land from the act of Assyria, still being oppressed by the descendants of the Assyrians. And Yahweh said that he will destroy them, and in that day will no longer stay upon them. But yet you still see people flow into Islam and unto the religions of the Ishmaelites and the Assyrians, still leaning on their oppressors. But in that day that he destroys them, this won't be the words from Jacob. You can also look in Isaiah the 11th chapter. The 10th verse, where it says, and in that day there shall be a root of Jesse. In this day a root of Jesse, which shall stand as an ensign to the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious in that day. When a root of Jesse stands, and who's the root of Jesse? That's David. That's David's father. It surely isn't anybody else. Christ in the New Testament never said Jesse was his father. When David stands up in that day, the Gentiles are going to look to him. He's going to be a sign. And it shall come to pass in verse 11, in that day, that David stands up in that day. Yahweh shall set forth his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people. Why you think the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and now, formed an organization, a intelligence operation called COINTELPRO, which stood for Counterintelligence Program, engineered by J. Edgar Hoover, the long-running chief of the FBI and the first chief of the FBI. Started a program called COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. They want to tell you that they don't do it no more, but that's a straight up lie. And the mandate and the mission of the COINTELPRO was to infiltrate revolutionary groups among the black community to stop the rise of a black messiah. This is not conspiracy theory. This is written in the annals of history of the United States of America. Their goal in the counterintelligence program of the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the United States of America is to stop the rise of a black messiah. And you know that's what they're trying to do, because they shot Martin Luther King, they shot Malcolm X, they shot Medgar Evers, they shot Fred Hampton, and they imprisoned Fred Hampton Jr. They shoot every black man they can find. Why? To stop the rise of a black messiah. But you cannot stop Yahweh's servants. He said, in that day shall come to pass. What day? When the root of Jesse stands as a sign to the whole world. The Gentiles are even going to seek to him. And what's going to happen? He shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, because they're still in Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcast of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Yehudah from the four corners of the earth in that day. And there ain't no FBI gonna be able to shoot this man, because Yahweh will be his protector. But in that day, that's what's going to happen. And look, even in verse 15, still talking about this day. And Yahweh shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and with his mighty wind shall he shake his hand and over the river, and shall smite it in the seven streams, and make men go over dry shod. And there shall be a highway from the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, like it was to Israel in the day they came up out of the land of Egypt. You see, the things that will happen in those days, in that day. Go to the book of Jeremiah, the 30th chapter. And what have we been discussing? We've been showing you the signs that Yahweh will show and the things that Yahweh will do when he talks about in that day. Don't just think of it as some trivial phrase, something that he just says just to throw you off the trail. He's letting you know about what he's talking about. In that day, this is what's going to happen. So you're not going to be mistaken. And before we go to Jeremiah, the 30th chapter, go to Genesis, the 15th chapter. Because everybody wants to know about our day, in our time, and what's going to happen with us today. And if you don't know about a day, when a day is, how a day looks, what Yahweh considers a day, where a day is, what signifies a day, what Yahweh's talking about in that day, then how are you going to know if the 400 years occurred or not? If you don't even know how to order your days, number your days, figure out your days, know the signs of your days, then how are you going to know if you're in the days of the 400 years or not? But that's why you got to go and seek Yahweh's servants. Because Yahweh told you to believe Elohim and you shall be established, and to believe his prophets and you shall prosper. And when Yahweh's servants start telling you about Yah's days, how to know them, how to record them, how to acknowledge them, how to see them, how to count them, how to live in them, how to organize them. And what is a day? A day is light. And Yah's word is light. And light is sown for the righteous. Why would Yahweh's servants so vehemently come and bring the message about a day and everything about a day for 1,000 years, a day for a year, and a day of the months, and a day from sun up to sundown, the day to praise him, the day to worship him? What you think we talking about? We talking about light. Yahweh said that this light will shine. If you don't know about your days, how are you going to deny 400 years? How are you going to reject 400 years and you don't even know about your days? You can't even tell me how many days is in a month. You can't tell me how many days is in a year. You can't tell me when a year begin, when a day begin, when a month begin. Yet you could tell me that it's not 400 years. Well, in Genesis, the 15th chapter, the 13th verse, Yahweh said, And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them and shall afflict them 400 years. And if you've been following us, you know that 400 years is 400 years of days. This is going to be the days of 400 years. The time of 400 years. We shall be in servitude and we shall be afflicted. The seed of Abraham, Yahweh's friend, his seed shall be afflicted and served in a land that is not ours 400 years. But Yahweh said in verse 14, and also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. And afterward, after what? After the 400 years, shall they come out with great substance. Just like at the end of the 430 years, the self-same day, we came out. Because it's in that day. Because Yahweh don't play around with his words. It's going to be in that day. It's not going to be in a different day. And in Jeremiah, the 30th chapter, he's going to elaborate on that day. In Jeremiah 30, people talk about Jacob's trouble, but they forget the silver lining in this very dark cloud. Look in Jeremiah 30. Verse 5 says, for thus saith Yahweh, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask ye now, and see, whether a man doth travel with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins, as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. Understand what Yahweh is saying. Yahweh is saying that there's going to be a time among Jacob where he's going to be in so much trouble that a man's face will turn pale. So he definitely ain't talking about your European friends, because their faces are already pale. So this ain't their trouble. He said a man's face shall turn into paleness. His hands will be on his loins as he's in labor and delivery, like a woman when she gives birth. And if you ever seen a woman give birth to a baby, then you know that's some pain. And if a man had to give birth, he'd probably die. So you know this is some trouble. And Yahweh said, alas, for that day is great, so that there is none like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble. But in all this trouble, in all this great horror, you shall be saved out of it. For it shall come to pass in that day. What day? The day of Jacob's trouble. The time of Jacob's trouble. The time where men are faces is turning pale. The time where you're looking like you're giving birth because of the trouble. In that day, says Yahweh of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off your neck. And what is a yoke? That means you're a slave. That means you're serving somebody. And I will burst your bonds. That means you're afflicted. You're oppressed. Just like he said you would be. But in that day, he's going to break your bonds and burst the yoke from off your neck. And strangers, because you're going to go into a land and be strangers. So they strangers to you, shall no more serve themselves of you. You're not going to be a servant anymore. But they shall serve Yahweh their Elohim and David their king. Again, the sign of your deliverance, whom I will raise up unto them. Therefore, fear thou not, O my servant Yaakov, saith Yahweh, neither be dismayed, O Israel, for lo, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity, and Jacob shall return, and shall be in rest, and shall be quiet, and none shall make him afraid. If you want to know if you're going to be saved, if Yahweh's going to intervene, if Yahweh's going to be with you, then you got to know when Yahweh's talking about that day. And that day is fast approaching. That day is coming. I know you drive up and down the street past the high towers, the tall trees, the high mountains. You watch the television. You hear them talking about the lofty men, the haughty men, the haughty men of Israel, the haughty daughters of Zion. All the haughtiness that flows out like a busted water main in the city. Just haughtiness upon haughtiness upon haughtiness our people are. But Yahweh said his day is coming, and he's going to be upon all the prideful, all the haughty, all the ones that are lifted up, and he's going to bring them low. But Yahweh said, in the day of your trouble, you're going to be saved. But if you don't even recognize Yah, you don't even call on Yah, you don't even think about him, in that day, you'll be destroyed. So until tomorrow, Yahweh loves you very much, and so do I. Praise the mighty Yah, and shalom.
Short time, I'm so glad I've learned I only have one life to live, and I'll never know